With an understanding of what JavaScript does on a web page and how to make it execute on a page, we can turn our attention to the structural concepts of the language and the syntax that implement them. Here, we'll discover these commonly used programming conventions. We're talking about conditional statements, loops, functions, and classes. We'll walk through the usage of each of these programming paradigms and the JavaScript syntax that makes them all work. Again, in this section of the course, we want to get enough familiarity with JavaScript structure and syntax to be able to work through the following coding sections with enough know-how to follow along and extend our knowledge. We do not want to get too deep into the weeds of this lecture-driven section, however, as it will be more effective for us to learn more and more JavaScript details as we code our cryptocurrency project in the following course sections. Okay, with that, let's dive in. First, we'll discuss conditionals. These are what enable automatic decisions within our JavaScript programs. In any programming language, code needs to make decisions and perform particular tasks depending on different inputs. For example, in a payment app, if the user has spent all of his or her funds, no more can be sent. Or, in a dating app, if a user is female, a female avatar should be displayed, and vice versa. In this video, we'll explore how conditional structures work in JavaScript. As we progress through this section, we'll discover more operators. The second video will bring on looping code. Sometimes we'll need something to happen repeatedly. For example, going through a list of teams and finding their mascot. In a general programming thought process, loops are what we use to do this. This section's second video will explain loops and iteration in JavaScript. The third video in this course section will introduce functions, which are reusable blocks of code that can be called upon from other code. Functions allow us to write a section of code that performs a single task that is contained within a specific block. That code can then be called whenever necessary by simply using a single convenient command. This rather than having to type out the same code in many places throughout a program. This video will detail the fundamental concepts of functions such as basic syntax, how to invoke and define functions, their scope, and how they can take parameters. Sometimes functions need to compute a return value that can then be used by the code that called a particular function. In this video, we'll learn about how to kick up the capabilities of functions by having them do just this. As we learned previously, some functions don't return a significant value after they've completed their logic, but others can and do. It's important to understand what their values are, how to make use of them in our code, and how to make our own custom functions return relevant values. The final video in this section will introduce the concept of objects and classes in JavaScript. Here, we'll look at fundamental JavaScript object syntax and revisit JavaScript features we've already learned about, reiterating the fact that many of the features we've already dealt with are, in fact, objects. In JavaScript, most things are objects, from core features like strings and arrays to the browser APIs built on top of JavaScript. We can create our own objects to encapsulate related functions and variables into efficient packages. The object-based nature of JavaScript is important to understand as we learn the language. In this video, we'll learn about object usage and syntax and learn to define classes that, in turn, create objects. Let's now focus on the first of our JavaScript concepts, conditionals. These are easy to understand. Basic Boolean level logic done with JavaScript conditionals are essentially code structures which allow us to test if an expression returns true or not, then running particular code based on the expression's outcome. The most common form of conditionals is the if-else statement. For example, the expression inside the if is the actual Boolean test. It uses the identity operator to compare the variable dog with the string poodle to see if the two are equal. If this comparison returns true, the first block of code is executed. If the comparison is not true, the first block is skipped, and the second block of code after the else statement is executed instead. This is pretty easy to understand. Not all logic requires the else statement and can be written like this. Here we're only checking for poodles and displaying the alert only if poodles are found. Pretty straightforward. In both of these examples, we're testing for equality of a string literal to another string literal. Equality is a logical operator in JavaScript. There are many others we can implement to make conditionals more robust and case relevant. Here is a list of the operators that can be used in if-then-else conditional logic. So, when number values need to be compared, or not equal is necessary for strings, or whatever,